It was 3:07 a.m. when I opened the door to a flashlight in my eyes, 2 cops on my porch, and one of them asking, "Sir, we've had reports that your truck is a threat to public safety." I stood there half asleep in my bathrobe, staring at them, and calmly replied, "Officer, that's my personal truck, parked in my driveway, and I'm the city's traffic inspector." One of the cops blinked. The other smirked. And right then, I knew Karen was about to have the worst day of her life. The absurdity of being woken up in the dead of night by law enforcement over something so mundane would have made a great comedy sketch, if it weren't real. I had stumbled out of bed to flashing lights, sirens, and a sense of confusion so thick I thought maybe I was dreaming. My dog was barking like the world was ending, my neighbor's porch lights were flickering on, and I could see Karen peeking from behind her curtain with her signature binoculars like she was some self-appointed neighborhood watch captain. Except tonight, she had escalated to calling 911. I wasn't even angry at first. Just stunned. The police explained that a 911 call had come in reporting a large commercial truck obstructing the road and potentially endangering emergency access. I gestured to my Ford F-250, legally parked in my driveway, nose nowhere near the sidewalk, fully within property bounds. The officer quietly walked over, examined it, checked the plates, then looked back at Karen's house. His partner didn't even try to hide the eye roll. They'd been down this road before. Now, let me make one thing clear. I don't have an issue with HOAs in general. When run right, they can help keep a neighborhood clean and safe. But when they're run by someone like Karen Wadsworth, it's less of a homeowners association and more of a dictatorship with fines instead of bullets. Karen was the self-appointed president of our HOA board. No one else even ran. She just filled out the paperwork first and started barking orders like we all worked for her. And tonight, she had taken her delusions to a new level. The officers eventually apologized and explained they had no choice but to respond to a 911 call, especially one flagged as a safety threat. I nodded, thanked them for being professional, and shut my door. I didn't go back to bed. I couldn't. Not because I was scared, because I was fired up. Karen had crossed a line. And she had no idea that the man she just tried to slap with a fake parking violation writes the city's traffic enforcement policy. Yeah, that's right. I'm a city traffic inspector. I work with zoning departments, municipal code enforcers, and I review parking ordinances weekly. Half the time, I'm the one who clarifies legal gray areas for officers in training. And this woman just tried to sick the law on me using completely bogus claims. She had no clue who she was messing with. But she was about to learn. At sunrise, I started my day early. I brewed the strongest coffee I had, pulled up my desktop, and opened the folder I never thought I'd use. HOA Karen files. I'd been collecting little things here and there ever since she fined me for leaving my trash bin visible, for exactly 6 minutes past pickup. I had documentation, digital copies of the HOA guidelines, and screen captures from community posts she'd altered. But now I had something bigger, proof that she called emergency services with a falsified report. I began by reviewing our HOA bylaws. The rules were clear. No commercial vehicles parked overnight on the street. My truck was registered for personal use, bore no logos, and again, was parked in my own driveway. Strike one for Karen. But she was sneakier than most. She had recently started distributing edited versions of the bylaws with small changes. Subtle tweaks like changing on street to on property, hoping no one would notice. Except I did. Around 10 a.m., I decided to talk to some of the other neighbors. I wasn't going to start a war, but I wanted to know if she'd targeted others. The floodgates opened. One neighbor told me Karen fined them $200 for putting up solar panels without prior approval, panels that had been installed 3 years ago with board approval. Another guy said she had towed his college-aged son's car while he was visiting for winter break. The real kicker? She fined an elderly veteran $500 for displaying a flag pole that was too tall. I could see the anger simmering beneath their voices. They were fed up but felt powerless. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Karen's reign had gone unchecked because no one had the tools to challenge her. But I did. I had city credentials, insider knowledge, and more importantly, I had motive. I thanked the neighbors and promised I'd look into it. I didn't tell them the full extent of what I planned, but they could tell I wasn't just gathering info for fun. Back at my desk, I dug deeper. I searched the city's zoning complaint database and found something shocking. In the past 6 months, over 70 anonymous complaints had been filed against addresses in our neighborhood, all following a similar format. The grammar, the wording, the excessive use of capital letters and exclamation point. It screamed Karen. She'd been reporting her own neighbors to city departments under the guise of anonymity. That's not just petty. That's harassment. I compiled a full report of the complaints and matched the timestamps to her social media activity. Sure enough, several complaints were filed within minutes of her posting rants about certain neighbors. I even found one complaint filed while she was at a neighborhood barbecue, where she smiled in photos with the same people she tried to have cited. The audacity was Olympic level, but I still needed more. I filed a Freedom of Information request for the 911 call and bodycam footage from the officers who visited that night. While waiting on the footage, I contacted the city's legal department and began preparing a formal complaint, one that could trigger a full audit of the HOA leadership. And while all this was happening, Karen must have thought I was still stewing in my robe, licking my wounds. She had no idea she'd just thrown gasoline on a fuse she couldn't see, one connected to every shady thing she'd ever done under the title of HOA president. The countdown had begun. And unlike her fake violations, what I was about to do would be very real. The sun was still low on the horizon when I pulled into the city zoning department lot. My ID badge clipped to my chest wasn't just for show today. It was my entry pass into a much deeper problem than anyone in my neighborhood realized. Karen hadn't just made a nuisance call. She had started a chain reaction that was about to come crashing down on her like a stack of overdue HOA violation slip. But before I could strike officially, I needed airtight documentation. Not just for the city, but for the community that had suffered under her petty tyranny for far too long. I started by reviewing the official HOA charter that Karen so conveniently loved to wave around when it suited her. The original version was filed 7 years ago when the development was first built. A few clauses were updated legally through neighborhood votes, which required quorum and city verification. But the copies Karen had been handing out were very different. In her latest resident compliance packet, I found half a dozen fabricated rules, including ones that didn't exist in any version of the original charter. She'd added restrictions on truck sizes, outlawed visible recycling bins, and even inserted a clause limiting how long holiday decorations could stay up. None of it had gone through proper channels. It was a forged document masquerading as law. And worse, she was enforcing it with fines. This wasn't a one-off either. Karen had been carefully, strategically reshaping the HOA's rules to fit her warped idea of aesthetic perfection. And by aesthetic, I mean whatever Karen likes this week. A neighbor with a blue mailbox was fined for non-compliant color choice. A family who built a basketball hoop for their kids was ordered to take it down because it was distracting to passers-by. Another neighbor, a single mom working double shifts, was given a citation for negligent landscaping because her lawn wasn't mowed for 5 days during a heat wave. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was punishing inconvenience. When I pulled up the file from the zoning complaint registry, it only confirmed what I feared. Karen had used her knowledge of municipal departments to file anonymous grievances and open unnecessary investigations. And they were all patterns. She rotated her targets, filing vague complaints like illegal structure observed, fire hazard suspected, or excessive driveway clutter. The more I dug, the more it felt like I was uncovering a one-woman harassment ring with our street as her playground and city resources as her personal weapon. But Karen had slipped up. In one of the complaints, she had listed the time of day she allegedly witnessed a violation from her front porch, a time that happened to be while she was out of town, according to a post she made on social media. It might have seemed minor to anyone else, but to a trained inspector like me, it was a golden thread to pull on. False reporting to the city is not just unethical, it's illegal. And now I had proof. Still, if I wanted the entire HOA board to take action against her, I needed more than just legal violations. I needed the neighbors behind me. So I spent the rest of the day doing what I do best, conducting an inspection. But this time, the inspection wasn't for the city. It was for the people Karen had been terrorizing for years. I started at the edge of the block, knocking on doors one by one. I introduced myself not just as a neighbor, but as a traffic and zoning inspector who wanted to help. Most of them were surprised, some were cautious, but all of them, once they heard Karen's name, immediately opened up. One woman, Sarah, told me through tears how Karen had threatened her with foreclosure over a disputed shrub line. Another man, Larry, showed me faded letters Karen sent pretending to be from the city, demanding he repaint his house or face daily accruing penalties. The stationery had no official seal and used a Gmail address. It was amateur forgery at best, but it had still shaken Larry enough that he spent thousands repainting his home. As the stories piled up, a pattern formed. Karen had no formal training in city compliance or property law, but she thrived on intimidation. Most of the residents were elderly, busy, or not fluent in legal terminology. She counted on people not questioning her word. And for years, that's exactly what happened. I compiled every testimony, scanned letters, took photos, and built a portfolio titled Wadsworth Abuse Dossier. It was massive, but I wasn't done. As night fell, I took a walk past Karen's house just to observe. She sat on her porch, sipping wine from a stemless glass, smiling like she ran the world. And for years she had. But not anymore. I knew her violations couldn't stop at forged letters and fake citations. So I focused next on her own home. She had a newly built wooden deck extending far beyond the permitted distance from her back property line. She had also rerouted the neighborhood irrigation runoff into her flower beds, causing dry patches in the adjoining yard. Those were both city-level violations. But there was more. I noted security cameras mounted on HOA-owned street poles, illegal without explicit approval. She'd installed them herself, claiming they were for community protection, but used them to spy on neighbors. Multiple residents confirmed she'd referenced footage of their comings and goings in HOA letters. That wasn't community safety. That was surveillance abuse. I documented everything, mapped it all out, and started cross-referencing it with city code. By the end of the night, I had found over a dozen violations, not just from a neighborly perspective, but from a legal standpoint. Infractions that carried real fines, potential lawsuits, and public exposure. The best part? Most of her violations were visual and undeniable. I didn't need hearsay or secondhand rumors. I had photos, timestamps, and law on my side. The final touch came unexpectedly. A neighbor named Eric, a quiet older gentleman who rarely spoke, called me over the following afternoon. He'd lived on the block for 20 years and kept a meticulous archive of neighborhood documents. Turns out, he had the original, unaltered HOA charter filed with the city. Stamped, notarized, and all. It was a smoking gun. Comparing it with the updated version Karen distributed revealed changes she had made without any board vote or city review. She had literally fabricated an entire section of rules. That was the moment I knew she was finished. I wasn't going to approach her directly. I wasn't going to yell or make a scene. No, I was going to dismantle her throne piece by piece, legally, methodically, and with the support of the entire community behind me. The residents were tired, the board was starting to ask questions, and I was holding a folder that would unravel every thread of her manufactured authority. She thought she could find me for a truck in my driveway. She had no idea she just parked herself in front of an oncoming freight train. By the time I finalized my report, the air around me felt electric. The evidence was overwhelming. Every violation, every manipulation, every abusive tactic Karen had used was now neatly catalogued, dated, and ready for formal submission. I wasn't just bringing complaints to the table. I was about to turn the very system Karen used against everyone else back onto her. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who lived and breathed rules was about to be buried by the ones she ignored. I didn't waste time. I filed a formal complaint to the city's zoning department through the proper channels, not as a neighbor, but under my official title as a municipal traffic and zoning inspector. My position granted me the ability to trigger investigations when code violations and resident safety were involved. The moment my report hit the city portal, it activated an internal alert system that prioritized cases involving potential misuse of public resources. Karen's forged documents, unapproved structures, and false emergency calls checked every box. But I didn't stop there. I knew Karen would sense the walls closing in if things moved too quietly. So I planned something she couldn't ignore: a community hearing to force a leadership review. According to the original HOA charter, which I now had multiple notarized copies of, residents had the right to call an emergency board session if 1/5 of the homeowners submitted written requests. After the week I'd had speaking with them, getting that was child's play. I collected signatures from over 2/3 of the neighborhood in less than 24 hours. People weren't just willing to help, they were begging for a way out. But the best was still ahead. While reviewing her property layout from city maps, I noticed something strange about her fence. It extended nearly 2 feet into HOA-controlled green space. That alone might seem minor, but in legal terms, that's considered unauthorized land encroachment. I cross-verified satellite imagery with zoning grid overlays and confirmed it. Karen had built part of her fence and garden shed over shared land. She'd effectively stolen a piece of public easement and fenced it off for herself. As if fate had perfect comedic timing, the footage from the police body cams finally came through. I watched it on repeat, each time more incredulous than the last. In the video, Karen could be heard speaking to dispatch, breathing heavily and exaggerating panic. She said she feared the truck in my driveway belonged to a suspicious man who had parked illegally and might be scoping houses. Her tone was dramatic, deliberate, and drenched in fabricated fear. She didn't just lie, she manufactured a whole story to weaponize law enforcement against me. When the officers arrived and realized what was going on, you could see the irritation in their eyes. One even muttered under his breath, "This is the 3rd one this month." I clipped that quote immediately. It was golden. I packaged the footage, complaint history, zoning violations, and forged documents into a single presentation. It was clean, brutal, and indisputable. I attached it all to a digital drive and printed hard copies for the upcoming HOA emergency meeting. But I still had one final chess move to set up. I submitted a separate report to the Office of Code Enforcement requesting a surprise inspection of Karen's home based on structural and land use violations. I marked it as time-sensitive, citing her pattern of harassment and misuse of city systems. The inspection was approved within hours. A team was scheduled to arrive the morning after our HOA meeting. I didn't plan it that way for dramatic effect, but I certainly wasn't going to complain. It was poetic justice delivered with the accuracy of a Swiss watch. When the day of the meeting arrived, the tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. The clubhouse had never seen that many people show up before. Karen walked in wearing one of her signature pantsuits and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She clearly sensed something was wrong. She made small talk, handed out pre-printed agendas, and acted like this was just another routine gathering. But the second I stood up and pulled out the binder labeled Wadsworth violations, the room went silent. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply presented the facts. I started with the falsified rules and showed the original charter side by side with Karen's forged version. Gasps echoed across the room. I moved on to the fake citations, anonymous complaint trail, and misuse of police resources. Then came the footage. The 3 a.m. bodycam clip of her lying to dispatch and then watching from her window like a villain in a low-budget crime thriller. People started murmuring, whispering to each other in disbelief. Some looked genuinely disturbed. Finally, I projected the zoning map and pointed out the fence that stretched into public land. The expressions in the room shifted from shock to outright anger. One neighbor stood up and shouted, "You fined me $300 for planting tulips too close to the sidewalk and you stole land?" Karen tried to interrupt, saying I was misinterpreting guidelines, but the board president cut her off. "We'll let the evidence speak." The board held a vote immediately. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president with a unanimous decision. Even her few allies on the board had turned. But her downfall didn't end there. As she stormed out, furious and red-faced, she didn't notice the Black City inspection van pulling up in front of her house. The timing couldn't have been better if it were scripted for television. The inspectors did their job quickly and professionally. They photographed everything: the extended fence, illegal irrigation system, the deck that had no permits, and the carport that violated visual obstruction code. Karen argued, pleaded, even claimed the city must have lost her paperwork. But no paperwork ever existed, because she never filed any. By that evening, the official city violation list was posted to the HOA message board. It included 7 major code violations and a preliminary fine estimate of over $18,000. And it would only increase if she failed to correct the issues. The best part? Her own rule changes meant any homeowner in violation of visual or structural guidelines had 10 days to comply, or face further penalties. Her made-up rules were finally being used against her. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Thank you notes, celebratory memes, and even a few dinner invitations. I wasn't looking for praise. I just wanted peace. But knowing Karen would now wake up every day to the same bureaucratic hammer she used to crush others gave me a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. Her empire was crumbling, not because I fought dirty, but because I played by the exact rules she thought she controlled. And now, the neighborhood was finally free to breathe again. You said. The days following Karen's removal felt like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. For the first time in years, people gathered at the mailbox cluster without darting nervous glances over their shoulders. Children actually rode bikes without Karen shouting at them for being too loud, and the woman with the wind chimes that Karen once declared a public nuisance proudly added 2 more to her porch. The collective weight that had pressed on everyone for so long was gone, and it was being replaced with something else: relief, cautious optimism, and, for some, a bit of long-overdue celebration. But while Karen's public downfall had been swift, the aftermath was still unfolding, and she wasn't going quietly. The morning after the emergency HOA meeting, Karen attempted damage control in the most Karen way imaginable. She sent out an email blast through an alternate HOA mailing list she had created in secret months ago, claiming that the meeting had been illegally convened, the evidence against her was fabricated, and she had been the victim of a neighborhood-wide smear campaign orchestrated by a rogue city official. That last part was clearly aimed at me. She even attached a blurry photo of me walking my dog, as if it proved anything other than I owned sweatpants. But no one took her seriously anymore. The damage had been done, and not by anyone else, but by her own actions finally catching up to her. Still, I didn't let my guard down. I knew someone like Karen wouldn't just roll over and accept the consequences. I expected retaliation, and sure enough, it came in the form of a complaint filed with the City Ethics Board accusing me of abusing my position for personal gain. She cited my personal vendetta, my role in initiating the inspection, and claimed I had weaponized municipal tools for private revenge. She even claimed I had doctored the zoning maps to make her fence look like it encroached on public land. It was a desperate move, but I had to take it seriously. The ethics board opened a preliminary review, and I was required to provide my full chain of documentation. Luckily, I had prepared for exactly this. Every action I'd taken had been logged, timed, and filed through official channels. I had deliberately followed the rules not just because it was my job, but because I knew Karen would try to flip the narrative if she could. I provided time-stamped copies of complaint forms, correspondence logs, inspection requests, and even internal city approvals for each step I took. The board reviewed everything in under a week and cleared me entirely. They even noted in their summary that my actions were not only compliant, but commendable given the pattern of abuse uncovered. That little line was enough to make the entire ordeal worth it. But Karen wasn't finished yet. When legal threats failed, she tried to rally support from her remaining loyalists, 2 homeowners who had benefited from her favoritism over the years. They attempted to call for a new vote, citing unfair treatment and unresolved leadership questions, but their motion was denied by the interim board. The board had already filed the necessary paperwork to strip Karen of administrative privileges, and a third-party legal firm was brought in to oversee future vote. For the first time, the HOA was being run with actual transparency. Meanwhile, the inspection of Karen's property continued to unravel more problems. City engineers discovered that her deck wasn't just unpermitted, it had been built over a stormwater runoff trench, disrupting flow to neighboring yard. That explained the standing water issue that had been plaguing 3 adjacent homes for over a year. The city issued an order to dismantle the deck within 10 days or face a $500 a day fine. She tried to argue that the trench had never existed, but city records, including ones I personally verified, proved otherwise. Then came the financial audit. It turned out Karen had been reimbursing herself for community supplies with 0 receipts, charging the HOA fund for things like security upgrades, which translated to her buying a personal home camera system. She'd also written checks for landscape maintenance that were never matched by any visible work. No one had noticed before because she'd been the sole gatekeeper of the HOA's account details. Once we brought in the third-party firm, the paper trail collapsed like a house of cards. Faced with the mounting legal and financial pressure, Karen made one last attempt to reclaim her image. She held a small gathering in her backyard, more like a sad little rally, inviting neighbors to hear her side. Only 2 people showed up, and they both left after 15 minutes. The rest of the neighborhood spent that same evening at the clubhouse, where the board hosted a community dinner to discuss rebuilding trust and future plans. I stood quietly at the back, sipping iced tea while neighbors came up to thank me. One older couple even brought me a homemade peach cobbler and said, "We've lived here 20 years and never felt so free." But it wasn't about praise for me. I'd done what anyone in my position should have done. The real victory was watching a neighborhood come back to life after being held hostage by a petty tyrant in yoga pants. Kids played soccer in the street again. Garden flags came back. One neighbor even started a weekend art class for seniors in her garage, something she'd put off for years because Karen once warned her it was an unsanctioned event. Word of the whole ordeal spread beyond the neighborhood too. A local news outlet reached out after someone anonymously sent them a link to the bodycam footage and inspection report. They ran a piece titled, "HOA President Removed After Inspector Exposes Trail of Lies," and it gained traction fast. Reddit picked it up, and soon the story was trending under r/EntitledPeople. The comments poured in, some hilarious, others painfully familiar. Apparently, every neighborhood has a Karen, or had one, until someone stood up. Karen, meanwhile, had gone silent. Her front yard became overgrown, her car rarely moved, and her once pristine porch sat unused. The surveillance cameras she installed were gone, dismantled as part of the city's enforcement ruling. The final straw came when a for sale sign appeared in her front yard one morning. She didn't tell anyone. She just listed it quietly, hoping to escape the embarrassment. But people noticed, and no one missed her. As for me, I returned to my usual routine. Work, walks with my dog, chats with neighbors that didn't involve policy violation. I joined the new HOA advisory committee. Not as an enforcer, but as someone the board could consult when they had questions about real compliance. I never wanted control. I just wanted fairness. And now we had it. It was strange how one 3 a.m. knock on the door had unraveled a whole chain of injustice. Karen had called the cops to intimidate me, to assert her control. But instead, she triggered her own downfall. Not through drama or revenge, but through facts, law, and community standing up for itself. That's the thing about rules. They protect people when they're applied correctly. And when they're not, they eventually come back to bite the ones who abuse them. It had been a month since the last HOA meeting, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood felt like someone had opened the windows after years of stale air. There was laughter again, actual smiles exchanged between neighbors who used to avoid eye contact out of fear they might be the next target. The changes were subtle but powerful. People painted their mailboxes without submitting 10 forms. A family down the street finally set up the treehouse they'd promised their kids, and the woman who always wanted to hang fairy lights in her backyard had strung them proudly across the fence, glowing like little beacons of freedom. The ghost of Karen Wadsworth still lingered faintly in whispers and inside jokes, but her actual grip on the neighborhood was gone. And the final chapters of her downfall were still unfolding, slowly, loudly, and in ways no one could have scripted better. After the inspections, the fines, the audit, and the news segment that aired citywide, Karen's reputation was in ruins. She tried to pretend it didn't affect her, going about her business with oversized sunglasses and an air of fake indifference, but everyone could see the cracks. Her voice, once shrill and commanding, was barely audible now. She didn't bark orders at kids for rollerblading on the sidewalk or send out passive-aggressive emails about lawn height. She just existed, bitterly, silently, watching a community she once ruled start to thrive without her interference. Then came the notice from the county courthouse. A civil lawsuit had been filed by one of her former victims, a quiet woman named Marlene, who Karen had fined repeatedly and harassed into selling her home for far below market value 2 years prior. With the help of a legal aid group and some of the documents I uncovered, Marlene filed for damages, citing fraudulent HOA practices, emotional distress, and financial loss. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a reckoning. Karen would now have to defend her actions in a courtroom where community gossip meant nothing and forged bylaws carried real consequences. The irony of it all hit me one night while walking past her house. The lights were off. Her once perfect lawn was patchy and overgrown. The front porch, which had once displayed color-coded seasonal wreaths and HOA banners, now looked like it belonged to someone who'd given up. A for sale sign sat crooked in the yard, half swallowed by weed. She wasn't hosting meetings anymore, wasn't pretending to be the queen of a suburban empire. She was just another disgraced former official hoping to escape before the final shoe dropped. But the neighborhood wouldn't let her memory fade quietly. A week later, the newly formed HOA board invited all residents to a community block party. No permits required, no sign-up sheets, no forced dues. Just food, music, and a big white banner that read, "Welcome back to our neighborhood." It was the kind of thing that hadn't happened since before Karen took over, and the turnout was overwhelming. Tables were filled with homemade casseroles, barbecue grills lined the sidewalks, and neighbors brought folding chairs and coolers like it was a holiday. I showed up late, figuring I'd just blend into the background, but I was wrong. People clapped when I arrived. I tried to wave it off, but one guy handed me a burger and said, "This is because you didn't just talk, you acted." The most surprising part of the event wasn't the food or the turnout. It was the unveiling of something the neighbors had secretly worked on together, a plaque mounted on a post near the clubhouse that read, "In appreciation of our community advocate, for reminding us that rules should protect, not oppress." I didn't know what to say. I never wanted recognition, never imagined myself becoming some local symbol of justice. But standing there with a paper plate in one hand and my dog's leash in the other, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. As the sun set and string lights twinkled above the tables, I overheard stories of new plans. A community garden. A mini lending library for kids. A proposal to build a shaded rest area by the walking path. Things people had shelved for years because they were tired of fighting with a system built to stifle them. Now they were dreaming again, building again. Karen had underestimated the strength of people once they were given back their voice. She tried to silence the neighborhood with rules and fear. But all it took was one person with knowledge and the courage to challenge her to flip the script. The final twist came a few weeks after the party. A friend of mine who works downtown texted me a photo. It was Karen, standing outside a car wash, wearing a neon safety vest and holding a sign for a promotional discount. She looked smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of her. The very woman who fined neighbors for washing their own cars in their driveways was now literally doing it for minimum wage. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel smug. I just felt the strange quiet of justice settling in a place where noise used to rule. The lawsuit moved forward. Karen's property sat unsold. The HOA board, now composed of fair and level-headed residents, began work on amending the rules properly, with votes, discussions, and feedback from every homeowner. I offered to help as an advisor when needed, not in any official capacity, just as a neighbor with the right tools. I no longer had to lead the charge. The community had learned to lead itself. What started as a 3 a.m. knock at my door turned into something no one expected. Karen thought she was calling in an inconvenience that night. She had no idea she was lighting the fuse to her own collapse. The laws she twisted, the documents she forged, the neighbors she silenced, every bit of it became evidence, testimony, and ultimately the undoing of her reign. People ask me sometimes what made me step up. Why didn't I just ignore it like everyone else had? The truth is, I almost did. That night, I almost went back to bed, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But something about that flashlight in my face, the officer questioning my right to park in my own driveway, the fact that someone could call 911 just to flex fake authority, it pushed me past my limit. Not because I was angry, but because I knew I had the power to stop it. And once I started pulling that thread, I couldn't stop until the whole rotten mess unraveled. And now here we were. A neighborhood reborn, not perfect but finally ours again. No more secret citations. No more forged bylaws. No more fear of what one person could do with unchecked control. We had taken that power back, not with noise or chaos, but with facts, unity, and just enough stubbornness to see it through. And every time I see kids ride past on scooters or hear someone hammering nails into a new fence post, I'm reminded that silence only wins when no one speaks. But the moment one voice says enough, the entire neighborhood listens. And sometimes it changes everything.